this morning? Two thumbs up? Okay. Great, thank you. Today we're going to start talking about a different topic that's organized around the last neuroscience core concept number 8.
Tethering azu jushi ani saba chikche di ni kodo ningbo geba di res di karsure tingöngi ta jushi da ani de ne le ngures.
As you can see from this list, the general idea around core concept 8 is the idea that neuroscience research is critical for promoting a healthy living for humans as well as addressing the treatment of diseases.
Ta chanzu de na la toji doa dila siba ina ni kengi res tanda kodo ningbo geba jura geba di ni kariko la res laba ina tang azu wangzi senri nang lo la ani lebe korine da wangza mala kola ine da shimju chene kodo digis ngaranzu ge detop kongbe tangya da ani hagwardu ta jige ngazu wangza da semdan dewe ani naza duzu da jetop nya on dida karso di dan dene yungu yobe ani namshadi res.
So when Aminda and I discussed how we were going to approach this, because as you can see, this isn't really focused on a particular topic or concept, I decided that I wanted to do something that connected with the discussion from earlier around language and communication.
저다 디 왕자 생리기 낭로네 쳔바 다 가르소레 녜젠 디 콜라 슬라니 민도아 메버선자다 겐라 코라니기 디 고도닝부 게바디 컨디스 진행 오르 제고고도 슬라니 아니 투두르 낭바 인스 아니 나니 코라니 타오체 가리 총슬라바이나 케사 ngaranzu기 아니 고도닝부지 콜라 게다다 디 콜라 nga주 투두르 낭바로아 디단 자르네 아니 오르 아니 제게 타오체 낭바 인스.
There we go. So I approached this. I was going to focus on the first two of these subtopics in Core Concept 8, which is really focusing on the role of using animals in research as a fundamental need for providing insights into the human brain, as well as research on humans is also incredibly important for promoting new treatments for different disorders.
The 고도닝부 디 낭로라 튼zen 시도아 시낭로네 테링 아주 아니 튼제 당분 다 니번이라 아니 디체 인스 트도 슈기 인스 따디 낭로는 찍디 카레슬라바이나 ngaranzogi ani wangza malare lebe korre di duzukola ani shipchakbu shin ge chedu 아니 튼루 셈쟁가라 다 심주 제저와 딱지 제디 아니 다 시제고 코스로지 차인고 레스 어디 아니 튼제 당보디다 안 튼제 니버디 엔딘데기 고도디 응원에 거라 딱 녜덴저지 용야기 체도 아니 미간라야 아니 지게 독십 제하다 아니 냠십 제디 제고 계기요 레스트.
Okay, so look at all of these people. Do you recognize anybody in this list?
The party nanglolas any kanzugi ming washimba sudwest.
Oops. Who is this?
The Ajadi Tangbodi Sures.
Marilyn Monroe? Who is this?
Di Midi.
Anybody?
La.
Anybody watch Star Wars, the movie?
Kanzuki Star Wars ki longne seeing best.
Nobody?
Yeah.
Yeah? This is the voice of Darth Vader. His name is James Earl Jones.
Dark Vader like tabgen chora di
Luke, I am your father.
cake the Kurangi keres.
Okay, how about this? Does anybody know him? Ed Sheeran, right? Okay. Anybody know him?
Meeting or shingives.
No? He was the subject of a movie. He is King George I of England.
Kura the England gi the karsure gebo King George thangbo se dires.
Who's this guy? Joe Biden, current president and maybe future president, we'll see, of the United States. Who's this?
Pagi aja de
Yes,
sures.
Nicole Kidman. Okay, great. Anybody know who this is?
Game on there.
Not exactly. Okay. No, I don't think so. Okay, we'll table that for a second. Does anybody know who this man is? Okay, no. All right, we'll hang on to that one for a second. Anybody know who this is? Elvis Presley. Anybody know who this is? Okay. Him? Tiger Woods. Him? James. Him? Shaq. Shaquille O'Neal, basketball player. What unites all of these people?
콘주 상마 더 가르소래 콘주 상마라 투몽 가리어레스 콘주 직디도 칭에 가르레스 라 they're all celebrities.
They're all celebrities?
Yeah.
Is everybody a celebrity in this picture?
상마 celebrity red west 년라 칭미. No.
Anybody know anything about what unites all of these people?
콘주 상마 더 투몽기 케주로 가리어레스 콘주.
They all smile. That's true in these. They are all people who stutter.
콘주 상마로 카디겐레스 미. 카디겐로.
Yeah. This person is, his name is, he goes by EMS Nabudirapad, who was a Communist Party leader of Kerala in the 60s.
Corolla? Kerala.
Thank you, Kerala.
Okay.
Anyways, he's a politician.
Okay. 네 야가기 첩시 메나치 제 케럴라 여러왕아데 이 마쇼 촉백의 총미지레스.
His name is Drupal Dechen Rinpoche. He is also a monk who has suffered from stuttering and went to and had a whole article written about his experience in getting therapy for his stuttering.
그라파기 부체디 angema 카다 셰디기여서라 안디 콜라 아니 디기 용화체 아니 코란디 톨라 쮸탑 마스나 카리나메 디콜라 아니 좀 쇼치 차상지도스.
So my point here is that people who stutter come from all different parts of life and can affect men and women, although in fact it affects men disproportionately higher than women.
따디 파르트엔디 딘데 따지 카디에기 경 용해처라 디 땅 아주 미지 아니 차시 세고로다 창만에 아니 용초기 여봐 다 부담 부모 제바이나야 하고도 개발이 나로라 카디야디 망아치 용구여레스.
Okay, so I wanted to show a couple of videos that represent the symptomology of stuttering.
다 년통직이 지도에 예스디 나로라 카디겐 속에 다 칼소레 카디베 가서 아주 내다 속으로 전다로 가리여봐.
One book every week, let me share some 3 powerful benefits. First one, you will improve your knowledge.
Hello, my name is
Hello.
Leanne Sharon. They sound like.
I want to go
Stuttering
to
can be
about,
defined as a disruption to the smoothness or fluency of a person. There are many different aspects of stuttering and different ways it can appear in a person's speech.
okay, so maybe,
However, 3
Sarah,
types of
where's the
stuttering
microphone?
are most common.
okay, so she's going to describe the 3 types of stuttering that is most common, and it will be in English, but I think you'll be able to get the understanding from this.
묘기 카딕다미다 숨다 용캡 체슈기 카딕다미다 숨 대세기야 그래서 아니 나버저 페제
Can you push
묘기 대세기야다.
These are referred to as stuttering-like disfluencies. The first type we'll cover are called repetitions. Repetitions are when a person repeats the first sound or syllable of a word at least 3 times more than is needed. It may sound like this. I want a snack. Or put that away. A second type of stuttering is called a prolongation. Prolongations are when a person holds out a sound for too long to where the speech sounds abnormal. It may sound like see the airplane or where are you? The third and last example is called a block. Blocks are when a person is unable to move their mouth and use their voice to continue speaking. No voice or sound comes out during a block. Here's an example of a block. I am so tired. You may not know that other physical characteristics can come along with stuttering.
Let's pause it.
These are called secondary behavior.
Perfect. Okay, and then let's do just the first few seconds of this one. Can you make that go?
Yes.
Yeah, you can just start play.
Ray Demnitz. I'm 20 years old. I'm from New York City, and I stutter.
Okay, you can pause it.
The heart.
Thank you. Okay, so there were 3 examples of the symptomology of stuttering. Repetition, prolongation, and blocking.
다 갈소레디 카디게치라디 넘버민다 숨나로 연구도아 용겹 체슈디 아니 찍디 아주 다직 양양도 돼야 되체 아니 니버디 안 다직 파 나르니 다직 나니 아니 라베야 되체 아니 숨바디 아니 코 찍디 라마토 와치는 가로에지도 어두주 숨.
Okay. And then in the video with the young man who said, he said his name and then he said, I am a stutterer. Did you notice anything about how his face looked or his gestures were when he was trying to speak?
따단다 년통 니바디 나로라 미션션지게 코나 아니 모르체 아니 코 카디기 요슬라니 labgidwa di nanglo la midi keje shewe kapsu korangi dongi namgyu re sugugi ani namgyu du zu tonang ke chungsmes kandeda sto very effortful.
Effortful, right. Like it almost looks painful for him to be able to get his words out. I don't think it is actually painful, but that's just the effort that it's taking for him to do it.
ngazu thona la ta be shukshu gyagi yobachi da halam jige sukser do yobasuraji nangi dwas da thengel la su da pheje gyagi gi mares yina ya korangi chik di ma tnya la ani shukshu ji gyago ya bezu shu chego ya ji thongu dwas.
Okay, so this is just the definition that I took from Wikipedia. Also to say that I will use the word stuttering in this conversation, but it can also be called stammering, and I don't know if there's a different Tibetan word for either. Do you?
No.
It's the same?
Khadi se de la chik shamba yore tanye shamba kha kelwa okay. So I was asking, is there another word in Tibetan for stuttering? And Kusho Lekpa said kakelwa. So I don't know whether that...
I see. You don't know if that's actually what this
stammering,
means.
yeah.
Okay. But if you were going to look in the literature, if you were doing your presentation on stuttering, you might also look at this word in English if need be. It means the same thing.
Tang azu thanda de thudu nanglo la gela khorangi thanye pheju che di stuttering se pheju chigi yes imba ina ya dila ani chik shamba stammering gi thone kogi ores ra di ndi thanda kyanzu gi da jinda ma di gi joshi kala jinda thingye chue gi shimju chebe kapsu ya chik stammering la di kala shimju khare che do di ani ta ne ta yo res chik chena ta okay sigres.
Okay. So here's a little bit about what we know about the demographics of the type of people who develop stutter.
Ta di nanglo la ngazu mi gi ta mi ngazu nanglo ne rik na yewa khande nanglo la ani khadiya di yungu yore di tengu yores.
So in here we see that it's demonstrating that their stuttering can take on these three characteristics: repetition, blocks, and prolongations, like we've already discussed.
Ta di nanglo la ngazu ta ya khadiya gi number sumdi ani phage kyardo che chikche ani ga do ye chikche ani ba di sik manaria du sum digala khoy do was.
As well, we notice that there's some sort of physical manifestation of the stutter, and people who stutter tend to develop behaviors to mitigate their stutter, which include avoiding certain words and actually having a reluctance to speak at all.
Tene da kha dinge du zu nanglo la rikji gi ani lunga gi ta namgyu thya ji gi yung res ra aya rikji gi di das kha dik ba di ken chene khurang zu kunjo la gyuwa thebya pena ani chik khashe ji chawanin pheje ma da ya da ani keja khora jing ma shene jing nga dam ya lo so wa de yung go res.
Stuttering develops in childhood, usually around the years between 3 and 6 years old, and somewhere between 5 and 8% of this age of children will develop a stutter.
Chidanda di gozuya jorwa di bugu losum ne thu paral gozugu res ra di gozu ne ta pu kha dinge mangbu yebe nanglo ne gyaja nga ne gyaja ge ba do ko muthu ne gemba chadiye ani khadi yungu yores.
Many children will grow out of their stutter, but those who don't, but there's a fair percentage of those who will not, and they will keep that stutter into adulthood. And so in fact, 1% of the global population has a stutter. Adults have a stutter.
다 부고도 망고직 라 그거도 디나로 카디바이네야 차로도 카디야 메바 차로 레스 이네야 카시직 라 아니 무투네 아니 디 카르소레 카디야 디체네 로야 첨부 차바이나 카디야 기견디 용고 레스 디네 임바 인디다 단다 잠불링기 아니 가조 미 아니 속두이 라오레 탕볼라 시바이나 야자직 제는 카디겐 레스.
Like I said previously, this tends to affect males more than females. So from a recent study of almost 1,000 people, 70% of those with stutter were male.
따디 카디야디 아니 개바다 비메니나 아니 두르바이나 아니 개바 나로로 시라기 망아 용고 레스라 아니 가수레 심주지기 나로라 미치동스직라 아니 때네 디나로 자저 둔주 아니 개바 포차기요레 자저 숨주 비메 차기요레.
And looking into sort of the family history of people who stutter, it looks like about half of the people who they surveyed had a family history of stutter, so somebody else in their family was also a stutterer. So about 50% had a family history, 50% did not.
다나시 콘주기데 카딩에 두주 낭로라야 고란주기 낭미 낭로라 카디겐 심바 두민도 제바체윤디 야정압주 로아 딱지 시산나는 야정압주 고란주 다 낭미 낭로라 카디겐 로아 여바체 아니 야정압주라 메바도 스트레스.
So, how do you think having a stutter affects a person's life or well-being?
캬안주 제바이나 카디야디기 아니 미지기 미셀라 미제다 코란기 데터블 슈기에 칸레스 제사레스. 나 슈기에 카리 제사레스 칸레스 땅사레스.
가시다 먼저 디 계제시에서는 지난날 계제시에 가 연구마를 가 카티고리 추서 지는 거 담문에 수서만 마사로 싶다.
So losing confidence in speaking and becoming shy of speaking in front of others.
Okay. What else? Any other effects do you think would...
셴바 슈기에 카리 탭사레스.
딩줄라도레스.
가시 충동되는 카디에 stressful and
Stressful?
yeah. So they will be constantly conscious of their efforts. Yeah.
Do you think it would affect somebody's ability to get a job?
디게 아니 레가토비알라 슈겐 체사르베스.
Yeah, probably.
Yes.
Okay, so I have a little bit of data that speaks to this idea. So first, again, we're looking at a study that looked at hundreds of people with stutter, and this was they asked them these questions around whether or not they had anxiety when they stuttered or not. So these are self-reported data.
다 심주지기 낭로라스 로니 드레 카디게 자타 카시시기 카시엘라 게제티버레스 게제티네 카디가 세미나라 강사업당하라 연구 베스네 게제티버레스 안탄데 데라 단다 장도저와 장도디 아니 카디게 코란수기 아니 마 랍샤베 아니 장도지레스.
So in this column, this is the anxiety level due to stuttering, and it goes from not anxious at all to extremely anxious.
따디 콘주 게제 강사업 걸 게제티버와 따디 세시도디 아니 카디베 가서 강사제 연구민도네 하장기 강사업 연구도 슬라니 세시디레스.
This column is people who have recovered from stuttering, so they had it as in childhood but recovered as adults. And this column is those that have the persistent stutter into adulthood.
따디나네 숑니도아 기마딜라 카레스 나게마 부구가서 카디바체 엔디네야 첨부차디 아니 코 타상에 kunzugi kunzula tiwa diche tene sumba di kareslawaina mutune ra chungdune chene mutune da ko khadiya di manro chene ne degen kunzula tibe len duzures.
N equals 46 represents the number of people who were in this group of recovered stuttering was 46 people, and here N equals 261 is the number of people in this group that they asked this question, the number of people who were in the persistent stuttering group.
다다 N 디기 아니 고 딱자기 장디로와 디디 단다 야 가르소랑에 마카디 다야 쇠창에 저 인바이나 미 디루카나를 미 십시루 여바체 무트네 카디겐디 루카나를 미 레지기요 레스타 딱지 디나라라.
And then these numbers here, the first number represents the number of people who said, yes, I am extremely anxious due to stuttering. And the number in the parentheses is the percent of the total. So 12 people represents 26% of the total, which is 46 people.
다디 장가디 따단디 카레슬라나 둥기 하기디 아니 고 카디겐기 장디체 로아 아니 시구 날이여바디 고 야차디체 로아디 낭로네 고 야차 파버와 디임버순자 베나 타마델라 아니 체메바슬라고로아다 앙첩 체메바 연구도 생에디 낭로라 미중니 십시루나니 중니기디 아니 라바레스 로아디 디 야차 팜나 니사루 사직 레스.
What do these data tell us about the impact of stuttering on these people's anxiety levels?
저도 이 장도들라 때바이나 아니 캬즈기 바나단데디 카르소레 카디야지로아 카디야디기 아니 콘수 셈나로 랑앙섭게야라 슈게마스나 가즈스티기 요사레스 캬즈 챵바이나 very impactful, a lot of impact.
Can we have something more precise?
딜레 딱고 갈수랑 아주 체 노와서 그래 대시 딜레 직나로 체스
nga dira chiwa tang samsa chiwa di kharasana tagi di ma de sungdi tsabla ani podang mo chewa na podile manga do sungo ra 심주 난 등도 디 대포를 망아 용거에 디 유진도 저 가리나 직 chiwa 직체 chiwa 니월디 단다 카 뒤에 줘라 디 유진 저거디 간지 제당 디 바라기 다 제저단 디 바라기 드와이나 양데다 디 제저디 레신 줘라 레비서부 디네케다 드와이서 디 바라기 드와디 가리나스 어디 좀
So he has two questions from earlier slides. One, you mentioned about the 70% of those were male and then 30%. Has there been done any study looking into what the reason is for that? One. And two, in general, what causes the stuttering? Is it the malfunctioning of the tongue and so on, or is it connected with the brain?
Okay, so for the first question, it is unclear why this is disproportionately affecting males over females. And to the second question, we will get to that in a few slides.
제가 지와 당보되기 랜디 단다 하고고요 말레스 개발낭로로 망아 용액이 준전디 하고 말레스 한 제와 니와디기 랜디 단다 데마카시기 제라 연구레스
단다 딜타나
단다 딜타와나
잘 생게
정말 도 세겐도
잠깐만요
이 딜타나 로잖아 anxious miduk lagandi da anxious extremely anxious lagandi ke barata ratio da hai na ko ngasa megyo da recovery rate pe kyo re da gina ani ngasa shikmo du lagandi da recovery rate pe hajan tho do 26% ho recovery rate do odi khaba ngasa ani recovery chadi manga yugo do thongi do
ala so he's making an observation here. It seems that there is a higher recovery rate for those who are not anxious. The karsarangansa mindulange de la recovery manga do sumbe.
잘 생게 될 마도 되나 따나 나서
26% di dirida kare ngang same ba lang ge do lai di che
37% 도 아디노 진짜라
di da di ro tha thang du zu ke je thi yun du ngema kha di be ka so ngang zap che chung kha zo yung go do la na ani de khar so re gya je ge ge ngang zap che chung ma so la go ra ani gya je ni za ru ge ngang zap che me ba chung so la go ra di ndi kyang gi khare observation de khare ngang zap shuk chim bu du la nge de la recovery tho ayo sares ala so he is making observation that it seems like those who had experienced extreme anxiety during stuttering, it seems like their recovery rate is higher.
I wouldn't have interpreted it this way because the way that the question was probably asked was when you were stuttering, how did you feel? So I wouldn't have interpreted it as a correlation in that direction.
Chidang dinde do da gela khorang gi laba ina da thiwa thiwe kap so ngema kha so khadi be ka khadi yong du ane chonang khari chung so ngang sab che chung khazu chung lan ke je thine ti len gya barwa ti masun za gela khorang gi thanda data dil te ne dinyi ni para la ane tunde sha thu samares ro ngang sab che me ba lang wa da thage yong wa ni la ane tunde dus la ni lap thu samares.
Galak, you had a question?
nga taw di chode na se yenge dige pe de ngang du shena di se ma la gu kina jora ya te ko na se yeshim bare ina tsushya dige shikchim bolan de pe na very ancient sing se jaja sun de da phashe de no jaja ni tsari ma de da ya tini mege extreme ancient sing tsushya de le de ni tsari di ma da phashe de chuji ma de da ya di se na ne ta sing de so ko de se shikchim bo de yenge de chorso.
So if we compare the two data, it seems like those who are persistent stutterer, for them, those who feel very anxious or extremely anxious is, less, or the percentage is lower compared to those who have already recovered.
Right. That's an accurate observation of the data. How do you interpret that?
The gang dishe gyawata tada che ine di thunde khari yagi bas
peshe nasa nashi bata ta ko nane gamsero da ko nije tijino gamde de shibshibuji ko testa tsushe de sono tang de ngazo me shimba stana tege o ji ko debo me ngona ya de ji maden de na til kange shibu yososu jungra ya nasa kore yange ta gamsera gamde thene.
So it may be the case that they have been, stutterer throughout their life, and as such, they are kind of used to it, used to the idea that they stutter, and therefore, the condition is not affecting them as much. But in this case, they are thinking back about their experience and interpreting how they were feeling at the time. So.
So nasa nasibe kol shivshibi ngandra me chigu thase shu ngama naadal sonatan ngandra la shikche ra ligdan samsa.
So in our experience also, when we were suffering from a disease, at the time, we may not feel as anxious, but later on when we reflect back on it, then that may made us more anxious.
That is exactly how I was thinking about these data as well, that maybe the memory of their stuttering was disproportionately heightened in their mind.
Didui kapge ngangsa ngangda langwe chorwa di ani tendang di tos chulne rwa ani shukche that kharsure themba di ani norne ande lava yongs.
This highlights a little bit the nature of self-report, or when you ask somebody how they feel, as opposed to a more objective measure of anxiety, like maybe looking at, or stress, and looking at cortisol levels while they're stuttering, that could be a more biological or objective measure. Here, they're asking them how they feel, and that can be, different for each person.
디기 ngaranzo 심주 chedan디기 라 내주 장도 두단저라 두단디기 아니 두단디 가주 ngazo 이덴 페르마페 디가레 삼로당해지도 아스카이스나 디 나로라 코란조라 게제티네 가주 소르스노스라니 아니 게제티 버와 저는 디기 아니 장도 차되어라 저는 더 딜레 아니 ngazo 가수레 장도 템바스고레디 pena keng kekham khorang gi nanglo la ngazu lubu khorang nanglo gi wa kharido do te ba inas ani khadik be kapsu khoi lubu nanglo la pena cortisol da de ani ngazu menze rik thole khasu yungu do on de chei jene ta ya chi gyor was.
In fact, what is the difference between very anxious and extremely anxious? How would you answer that question, right? So it's very subjective. So you can get some general ideas from these data, but maybe going too deep into it might be a little bit overreaching the data.
Penachashaba ina dinanglo la tiwani yorwa ani ngangsap shira langsun lai jida ngangsap seme ba langsun lai dini ni para la kheba khandes chegi res rwa ani di lengyaya da di duni ni kheba di 아니 유전 수술을 떼봐 진짜로 요러스 저자들 디 장기다 내주 장도 랭야디야 딜라다 신자마스나 딘데 요레스.
So I find these data to be helpful to understand how the person who is stuttering feels and thinks about their situation.
다 이나야 디 가리던 그레슬라바 이나 코라 카디겐 코라기 서로와도 가리 중요해 봐줘라 내단딜라 di any sort to go rest
gena ndadi tiwachi tanda gonzo gi di geje tungido ngamza ke gi geje di ngamza ke geje de kola ngamza ke go we gyugen chira pena korangi zubu gi effort che ne che go ya chane ngamza ke gi rikchik da yamena mi gi tadang jira ta mi gi tadang de la babe ta so zubu la di uttering che de kale me bai ne ta mi gi tadang digi gangya nanda ke chungura ta this study digi tola chik tayo na menes.
So his question is what or has the study asked the subjects or the participants about what caused that anxiety? Is it the physical effort or is it their mental projection of what others are thinking about them? So
these are great follow-up questions. I don't think that in the paper where this data was reported, they didn't report those data. So I don't know if they did do those follow-up questions and it just wasn't reported, but at least published, I don't have any understanding of that.
the nezu tangdo di lensa gi somsho khorang gi nanglola ani khunzu dinde geje thi men ko la khe kuch mindus ra di basun za ani di nezu tangdo di temba re ma do khandes ji ge ani ngangsap la ya di khari ki lang dinzu ke sega mindus.
Okay, so now let's look at, these are the same participants. They also asked them questions around, more around their life trajectory.
That the taxi Takaran che, Tiwatisa, the Dinanglo Consu Tiwa Kariti res Lavaina Kuranzo Mitsiki, Jolam Surajora, Didan Deni Tiwativares.
So the way the numbers are presented is the same as the previous slide. The total number of people who responded to this survey was 713. They were all persistent stutterers. And this is the number of people who responded, and this is the percentage.
ko mutune ani khadi gen khoran che mi thanga khazur dungya chuksum che di nanglo ne ta thiwa phagi thangbo di thibrwa di nanglo ne ani kharsure mi shibgyang abjung agu thanga digi mi khazus ki phagi dila lendi kyawa di tungyo re and di kyacha khazu imba di tus tende res.
So for this first one, 459 people felt that stuttering affected their educational attainment.
또 미 십자 ngabjungagugi ro khadiya dige Quranzugi 또 신기 아니 ngazo kharsore 신기 tumde서라지라고라 tumde 쇠야라 아니 슈겐 체송슬라니 슈겐 체바디 안 sorgiores.
Here, 55% of the people felt that stuttering was a barrier to finding employment.
dine mi gyajangabju nganga 시기 로 아니 카디야 디기 레가 쇠야라 아니 개겐 체송슬라니 sorgiores.
Here, 65% of the people said, yes, stuttering had been a barrier to their progression in their career.
dine dinanglone gyaja tukju renga ngagi ro 아니 카디야 디기 Quranzugi legegi da dunlamdila gekche sonslani gekcheba sorgiores.
And then 80% of the people reported that they had at least one of the above. Yeah.
dine ta gyaja geju cha dungi ro 아니 카딕바딜라 데네 dunjusum khangrunji Quranmizinal chungsonslani labiores.
So taking these two sets of data together, it really suggests that people with stutter at least feel like they are having a significant impact, a significant negative impact on their life.
다 단다 네지 장도 드니니라 때바이나 로 카디야 디게 아니 카디겐 강사지로 데라 아니 미젤라 아니 슈킹 gemba 아니 첨부 때 여바직 아주 고토고도 왔어.
Okay. So I'm sure you are interested in this question. What is happening in the brains of people who stutter?
다 텐데 칸주기 세미나를 티와디 레비오레스 아니 카디겐기 미두주기 아니 카디베갑수 아니 레벨라 카리 용기오레스 카리 교와 카리 중기오레스.
Okay. So let's look at some data in that respect. So remember, these are humans, and to be able to peer into a human's brains, we have just a few different techniques to use. In this experiment, they used MRI to look at the structure of these people's brains.
다 두주 상마 미로와 아주 카디겐 두주 미임바인디 다 미기 레벨라 카리 중마 중세디 다야기 탑시 아니 카시시마도 요 마레스 라 단다 디 따세 디 낭로라 MRI 페지체네 아니 레바나로 카리 교와 또 레바 디 칸데도 디 테바레스.
Okay. So what are we looking at here? We have three different groups of people. We have a control group, people with stutter, who are, so it's persisted in their life, and then people who stutter and they've recovered from that stutter. So three groups.
다시 다디나로 루가 숨도 직디 당진 루가체 아니 니바디 아니 고 무튜네 아니 카디겐 소체 아니 숨바디 아니 카디네 타상에.
The age group of the people in this particular set of data are 3 to 5-year-old children.
다디 나로라 카르송아주 로세치라 로세디 로숨네 nga파레스.
And the researchers were interested in looking at some of the white matter tracks that connect different portions of the brain, specifically portions of the brain that connect language areas that you learned about yesterday.
다디 심주 나로라 콘주기 카릴라 다 도나 제요레스 라바이나 라 아니 아주 레베기 차시 낭핀주인 투가 자겐기 까르제죠라 까르제기 달람 온디 디다 케버도 단다 아주 깨다 제웨 레베 차구리와 콘조바라라 아니 데투 제겐기 까르제딜 테버레스.
So while you might not be familiar with all of these different terms for white matter tracks, you might recognize this one, the arcuate fasciculus, which was discussed yesterday.
다 단다 데나로라 다 달람게 카르소레 달람기 다 ngo인디겐기 짜제로와 레베 차구스고레 달람 아니 카직델라 티도아 디낭로네 카시지 나버스 지지나 사바 인기레스 이나야 단다 슈입 춘보세디 가장 아주 저도 제바디로와스.
Who remembers what the arcuate fasciculus connects?
다 디기 다 슈입 춘보디 가리튀고 레스트. 투가
근데 브로커가 왜네가니 니수 파수 상바다부 치고라 니수 젤렌시사.
that connects Broca area and Vaniki area.
Right. Okay, so it might make sense that they were interested in looking at this particular white matter track in the brains of people who stutter.
제자다 디 아니 콘수기 딜라 다시 딱제 제디 고유도 와스 라드니니 투가자 야기요라 슈임 침부디.
Another white matter track that you might be familiar with is the corpus callosum.
단니 데네야 고 카르솔 아주 잘람슬라고래 직 넘버 2 페이지 균가 여바디 corpus callosum 라이디 사슈인레 삼슈인레.
Do you remember what the corpus callosum is or what it connects?
디 사슈인 디게 가리투고 레스트. The two hemisphere.
Right. It goes across the two hemispheres. Exactly.
네바기 둠체니 디 투고 레스.
And the third white matter tract that you might not be aware of is called this complicated name, superior longitudinal fasciculus.
근데 달람 직 넘버서 지치는 디 시 이게 말에 디 카레슬라바이나 superior longitudinal fasciculus 라이디 귀기 자친 땡마.
And basically that is a white matter tract that connects on one side of the hemisphere, basically from the front to the back of your brain, okay?
디게 가르 투가 자거스나 레베기 둔차지로와 둔차다 잡찬이 엔 투가 자데요레스.
So we have these white matter tracts that connect different areas of the cortex, and the question is, does the structure of these white matter tracts look different in people with persistent stutter, people who've recovered from stutter, or not?
제가 아주 달람색으로와 카미라 몽구지도와 레바낭로라 다 건조기 딱세 날 가르때 바레슬라바이나 아니 미베 무튜네 아니 카디게 수긴 달람도주다 야 카디네 타상에기 아니 미츠 아니 달람도주 케바도 미도 아니 때바레스.
Okay. They used colors very nicely to help us see some patterns in the data. Blue is control. Green is those who've recovered from stutter. And red is those with persistent stutter.
다 건조기 단다디 루가 숨기 장도제로와 장도디다 세부진에 아주 개발 체도의 체도 천라미나와 땅도와스 디나로 천랑군부디 아니 땅진 루카디 디 장도디레스 아니 마부디 아니 카 말에 디 장구디 아니 카디네 다상의 소기 아니 장도디체 마부디 아니 카디네 무튜네 카디네 디겐소레스.
And along the x-axis is the age in years of the participant. So one thing that was really nice about this study is they followed those children from age 3 to age 6 and collected data every single year so they could get a sense of the development of these different white matter tracts.
다 디나로라 테디저와 테디디기 아니 로츠응기도와 로츠응기 버선자다 딱제 디나로 카리낭 바레슬라바이나 로숨네 고주네 아니 부구두조 로다 야게 nga 말렘바도 아니 로레신데 콘조기 네주 장도 레네 안 딜라 유와 칸데 두고도 디테요레스.
On the white axis, what you're looking at is the white matter volume, so the amount of white matter. So in this MRI that they took of these children, they're looking at the amount of brain space that these white matter tracts took. So that's what you're seeing on the on the y-axis.
다 슝디저라 슝디 디나로라 슝디 디 카르츠응기 레슬라바이나 아니 카르제기 다 봉체저와 딜라디다 춘부디 조기 툭세라고래 봉체디 아니 레바낭로라 콘조기 다 고사도 가주 숭기여바디 아니 슝디디 춘바치기여레스.
Okay, now that you understand all of that, what is the general pattern that you see in the data shown here on the right.
that chance ge di kharsura nga zo remote ki dodama suna chemba sonjas and the remote the sum shadwa di nanglo la chawe ani kharsura nga zo de do kharisi gi dos Okay, so those who are persistent, the volume of white matter it falls or decreases as the year progresses.
Compared to what do you see for the other groups?
The shembadan durba ina khande reshas.
Tanziruka de opposite reda. Dokcho. Tanziruka da nyebaya traje dinela durde dokcho leangda.
So compared to the other two groups, their white matter increases as they grow older.
Right, exactly. So it is not enough to say that in the persistent stutterers, their white matter volume decreases. That alone isn't enough. It doesn't have enough meaning in it. You have to have a comparison group to understand what that means.
The dendeje tane de she gawe kapso ani khorangi karje ki adi kharsora phongse de ma chagi do dil laba cham gi khoa ge yo mares khoya ge yo mares cheza ani chungdur chene ani chenda di dan dur yon dus ani juwa dendeje dugu dos landi tengores.
Okay, so in summary, oh yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. Nga device duro tanda di grab sum dilata ba ina ta kondna la mixe tay je gar dolana tanda mawo chi do thing mawo di kondo lo sum gi nega so imba ina kola mango shosh da white matter de mone je nei me chidan se ba ina ta chikba do chi yong ba chi gra tang bo nega so ta ko lo cheru cheru dogi ina ko connection ni nyuru do ba ina ta ko tay che ina da lo sum gi nega so ko jamba gynding gi pugu den zola tene kola white matter de mawa yo so ta di kande do chi.
One unusual sort of observation here is that at the beginning, the white matter for the persistent stutterers are much higher than the other two.
So we're identifying the difference between here
initial,
and
yeah,
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting observation. I don't know what we can take from that necessarily, whether or not having more white matter volume at 3 years old is actually predictive of developing a persistent stutter. That's an interesting hypothesis that maybe you could make after looking at these data.
Chizata di changdo di la te ne rwa ani kharsore ani shembe kapsus ani karze manga yoba digi ani maungba ani ko khadigen chagres lani ngomba che dinde jik chesha di la te ne jik jina che chogro was inaya ani gyala khurangi ta thanda dinde gi ngajo changdo chewa yoba ji yorwa kharsore karze gi ani phongse chewa yoba digi ya thenda khari khogi yome di gyala khema sons rwa 당보 고주디로와 당보 고주디 라고 그랬다 로숨 임백업수스 아니 무튜네 카디겐디기 아니 가르세 봉세디 체어도와 토와 요바디기 다 고아 가릴랭 거면디 다 케마손스.
Okay, so in summary, these young people, these children have differences, significant differences in white matter tracks that connect both important parts of language system as well as across the hemispheres and across cortical areas.
다 디기 디토네 가지고 다 간제 단다 릭숨지라 카디켄다 카마디겐 야나 타겐 콘주바라라 다 레베기 잘람 코랑기 봉세기 차네 아니 케바 두고 여바디 케바 뭐세 되부 두고 여바디 땡게도 와스 디야 아니 고在dat ngazu salam lagore talam kha mida mangbu nanglola ani kheba dugu yobadi ani chungdos.
One thing you might not know about the two of these different white matter tracks is that they also play a role in connecting to a subcortical structure called the basal ganglia.
ngotsarla gore ta chike deyo gi ne den chik dela tanda chumbu dalam la gore dalam du zu kha chigi ani nga zo basal ganglia leshap chadu la ta ani tu yores.
Does anybody remember anything about the basal ganglia?
leshap chadu ko la ke thengi dues.
We haven't talked about it at all in this session, but you might have in some of your other neuroscience studies.
ngazu zinda da trin dela di ko la ke thudu chung ya mares ine ngama ten thudu chung ki res.
Peshe V1 the V2 the chitini mambo shede dimara twania basic ganglia.
Does it have anything to do with V1 and V2? Visual
Not necessarily. Did you guys ever talk about Parkinson's disease?
number so gi thanda Parkinson gi ne gi ko la ke thudu chung swes.
You did a little bit? Yeah? Did you learn a little bit about maybe that deficit in Parkinson's disease comes from the basal ganglia at all? Do you remember?
Parkinson gi
Okay,
da
that's fine.
nature ne di ne ko basal ganglia di chawa tu san chema tu wala tene yong gi yobadi hengi yobes.
Kol Parkinson this down the load is down the kali jound with the the truth level sachila. Ko lot does tangda tamoni dadan lot on the kali jound is.
Okay, so he can remember an experiment where a stimulation is done to a part of a brain and it sort of reduces the shaking.
Right, exactly. So I bring this up because the basal ganglia is a structure that is known to be critical for the initiation of movement and selecting appropriate movements.
Tanda the leshap chadu ko la gena gi sungo ed kharres la baina leshap chadu di ani ngazu lubyo gi gugyo khari na go tsuya la ani medo mirongwe ani lebe chashe chi res dana shin lubyo gugyo tanya la ta tangda mangbu yebe na lo ne khari damgi ba dida ani jawa yu genge chashe chi res.
So when you think about language and speaking, you might agree that through the language system, like into Broca's area, you have developed a micro plan of like what you want to say, and you're going to correct me if I get any of this wrong, but the execution of that plan needs to go through the basal ganglia to the motor cortex.
tang azo ke da lagwar do da ngagi joba jorwa joba di any dream backup sus ani lebe nanglo la da khar sura ngazo microplaning la na chargo thawa chigyorwa chargo thawa di che ne di ta chargo che bana shi ani ma ngazo ngoso lagdar che chujyorwa on di ta lagda che de jamala thewa du gu gorwa du shane du gu gorwa di guya la ta
So maybe you can think about the circuitry that's involved in executing speech would be to all of the language circuit that you talked about yesterday then gets fed into a circuit that drives the motor production of speech.
tang ngosu nga ni ma ani kasu nga ke twin chebe kapsus ani khaza ke dan dewe ani lebe chashye jiwa pesu di nanglo la ko dalam du sangma dewa yo bache an dune ne ani ngosu nga ma ke twin chela ani shane du gu go ba sonza ani gu gye gi ani dalam du da dewa chane yungo res.
So for fluid speech, you need to have all of the areas that we talked about yesterday, Wernicke's area, Broca's area, auditory cortex, etc., all of that feeding in to then a separate circuit that's actually going to do the moving of your mouth, the moving of your tongue, the moving of your larynx and your vocal cords.
디인데다 nga gedrin chebe kapsu ani kedan dewa yebe lebe chashe duzu sangma tako chawa chigire rwa tinalo la broka ki kyakyen ani waneki ki kyakyen tesor relation rwa du sangma che duzu sangme ki ani dadi an thama nga ma gedrin chela kha gu gore che gu gore ani chawa gu gore duzu ani guya la yako di tangzin chinge ki an dalam shemba chila nizu do gorbas.
So maybe you can think about it a little bit as sort of the language circuits that you talked about yesterday as being one wheel of a bicycle, and then the motor circuits, which really have to do the moving, a second wheel of the bicycle, and you need both of those wheels to turn so you can move.
제가 아주 Pedagogy 샤바이나로와 아니 계단 대화에 가서 달람카지로디 아니 강코르기 콜로 당보도 소라디체 데네 아니 응어스 마가 주에 주로디 주에디 고 구규 아니 달람단 대화 차거로디 아니 콜로니버도 부체네 라니 아주 저바디 대보진에 마 추규규도 용해라 아니 콜로니가 딱다 아니 투상기 자원체고로 왔어.
In stuttering, you have this disconnect in that motor production. They know what they want to say, but the production, like can I go? There's a delay, right, in the ability of the motor system to produce what the language system wants to do.
다 카딩에 기낭로라 라 아니 아주 계기 아니 달람도주 자와투자네 지겨워 간서는 고나게자 가리 신도여 봐도 상마코나 하고고 와스 이내 응어수 나디마 됴베급수 안 됴마투 버치네 아니 고 가디고와 디인데 아니 응어수 단당 아주 구교기 아니 달람 기타 내가 쳐야디 낭로라 다 내가 투자 제마투바 어딘데 레스.
So this model that's been created, which they call the stuttering circuit, is generated from a number of different pieces of basically MRI types of data from people who has, fed into creating a model that incorporates this idea of these different circuits that are linked together to drive speech. And the white matter tracks seem to be playing a significant role in the deficit.
때탄데 디나울 달람시로 달람딜라 아니 카디에게 달람슬거도와 딕딕 달람 제가 카디에게 달람 디낭로라다 코 차시 카시질레스와스 따디 딘데기 다 간주 베수 마스나 스웨디 가릴라 시샤브레 슬라바이나 다 MRI 다 딘데기 아주 니주 장도 라바지로 탁제시네 장도 라바두주 아니 두줄라 시샤네 아니 카디에디 아니 고 카르수레 달람 딘데지라 용다 아니 디낭로라 아니 카르수레 레베 차시 수수 바라라 제티 치겐기 아니 달람 카직도 두주베 nenga chim부 임버직 단도디 카르수레 디나로 넘버스 우퉁기도스.
Okay. Who's got a question?
술라티와 yes.
Sista, chorla. Konda. Tanda didio kosa samlo chibara yarsinda kyunya mardelunda. Samlo taangi tilkange yamare ngige jande childa. Tindi ta koso di kha tunge to kha matu kini yige tiya to sun jole se gor kar se gor. Log tse de chibanda yaba khande hakwana. Ko semba gi kange moiba.
So you mentioned that the problem lies in the motor circuit for stutterers. So if we have stutterers and non-stutterers write something or think about something, do you think that they can perform equally?
That's a great question. I think that answer is yes, but I would have to verify that. I think the writing fluency is fine. I think it's just the speech.
딱 강에디 마주바 때야디라 강에 차고 라카디 마도 지야라 페지 직바 연구를 삼기도 시내 견라고란다디 군제 지야라 니 제조 카르수레 딱제 카르도디 따고 그러왔어.
길라 드르치 Dangi tachi dina ragila neba ta khadiye neba taki majun shoira dila white matter ki tukje ta chewa ro chunguda tadi khasan white matter ki chele chigla ko synapse ra twinsam ko twinsam kaje manga white matter manga yuwa khasan ki chi chungso ta dila chena
kyaje mare
synapse ani dila chena ra ngamsu tanda repetition chidwa dila ta ko twinsam mambule ni in de ta drabe do ko chila sumshi la ta twinsam mambu se de na ani chila sumshi la jungura ta simju dila ta kunzo kyen sumdo di ta cheta ba chigla di dis yorbe yambe random che shares never sumjera nga dige dije blogging che ani prolongation
nga dige ki number sumro di khasa kyardo che sigrim buta kharsa naria di che ani gaya di che
ta di sumna ne tanda ki simju jera
simju di ho
cheta ba chig losre yambe ngeme la reves
so one observation that she is making is in the case of repetition it seems like the person is producing the same sound many times so it appears as if there is a lot of signal being received by the muscles to produce that that very sound several times so that's an observation her question is in the study group in the stuttering group, people who stutter, persistent stutterers, do they have all these three or is it just focus on one type of stutter?
Yes, so they were verified, all the participants were, the people with stutters had these three main symptoms of stutter.
그래서 이 딱지 제사지로 딱지 제사기 낭로라 숨과 연구요레스.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a question.
Karsa.
아니 디미 다야디. 먼저 디미지에 다고 말해. 라. So in customary in our community it's said that repetition of a sound we call it mantra of Manjushri helps improve the stutter so from a very young age children are taught to recite that mantra and it goes om arapaza na di 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 yeah so that's
it is something that's been observed in people who stutter. They stutter with speech but not with singing, so I wonder if what reciting the mantra is kind of moves more into the singing than into speech.
지다 데 셰라 카디겐스 셰당주나 카디마레슬라니 셰당도 있다 야부당 투고 레슬라니 숨고요 레사 제잔디 무슨자 아라바자 교레디 직진한 딘레기 초라 파 두메도스
베나단다 아리기디 에지티세 카세 디가 아톰니젤랭기 디 부지다 로아시 카이티부다 혹시 예예당다 아톰부장이지다 아리기 가르스 에지티 아메리카 갓 탤런트
so Gelek was remembering one of the participants on American Got Talent who won the award. He was able to sing really well, but he stutters very severely.
Yeah, that's interesting observation, isn't it? That really they can be so fluid in singing, but not at all in their speech. So that's an interesting area of research and of therapy is kind of like trying to think about this observation. It's warm in here, so I wondered if you wanted to stand up and do a little stretch because I'm about to shift gears into a slightly different topic. So.
That's how you yaji shang pazu.
so much. That's so kind of you to think of me. Yes, perfect. I definitely need a drink of water. Yeah, get some water.
Oxygen again.
오, 김미죠.
Ale, đi check à? Giáp à? Ale. Isile, yeah.
Point. Good point. I bet it is. I mean, it's direct. It could be. This is also a great spot for the camera over there. But I'm going to go with it's for the fan. Okay, I hope that made you feel a little bit better, got some energy going. We have about 15 more minutes and then we'll have a tea break.
당아주 단다 류제체디 도시게 누바 파르마 누바 사발레베와 예스 안까마정아 젤러스 퍼센트 샤기 예스.
Okay, one thing that's also very interesting to help us understand a human disorder is to look into family history and see if we can find some linkages to certain genes that might be explanatory in the disease.
당아주 민낭로라 투견데 다 나자다 용거와 안데 용두 두줄라 아니 지게 두주기 주단데 신야라 아니 릭제라 때네 라 아니 코 리기 낭로라 딘데 나자디 두민도 투견데 두민도 따야디 아니 펜토부시라요레스.
Okay, so what we're looking at here is a pedigree of a complicated family in Pakistan that intermarried.
tātānta dēla pārch nāngyē chidwa, nāngyē di tāngāzu rīgzē tā kharsu rē rāb ki tōngbōs lā korwa, dīndē chī rēs, di Pakistan nānglo lā rwa, ko mirik chīk lā tē shabar rēs. Did you say intermarry?
Intermarried, yeah. Do you know what that means?
Yeah. Di Pakistan ki tānta di kharsu rē ngāzu 동세비 내다 디 낭로라 아니 고란조 녜펜주 아니 창사게 디오레스.
So are you familiar with looking at pedigrees when you were in biology and talked about genetics at all?
캬안주 갱외다 디 릭제콜라 아니 장베캅수 딘디 키 카르소랑아조 디
Okay.
릭제기 랍치로라 림바디 장바 임베스.
Okay, great. So the complicated part of looking at this pedigree is that you have these lines here that represent intermarrying within the family, so between cousins or aunts and uncles. So this part where you see this line here, this person married this person, and they had these 3 children, for example. But these are related family members.
tātānta dēla rīgzēki rābki rīmuchirwa, di nānglola di gōnyōkbodwa, tīk sēkni tīk chidwa, digi āni khari tsungyo resla na nyēpinzu chāngsa gyāya di tsungyo res, rwa, tā nyēpinzu chāngsa gyāya siyundi, āni cawu nyi chāngsa gyāya rabda, ya āshāngda āni kharsa, 아니 더 창사게다 엔데치네 녜펜주 창사게 뚱겨 레스와 제산변나 디더 차샤바이나 로와 디다 디니니 따코 녜차데 레스와 안 창사게네 코니니라 부고 숨중와.
So in these types of situations, you have a higher probability of seeing, of revealing gene mutations that you might not have seen previously if there wasn't this intermarrying within a family.
딘데기 네다 낭로라 아니 릭젤라 다나가주 규르도 테바지요라 두주 아니 ngoya디 lela chagiyo res 라 di dinde meba ina ko rigze di yoba ina rigze di karso ngazo ifshi jen la gore digi thone mangyo ba che ta ina ya ko pinya nanggu changsa gya ni bu ge yondu dinde gi rigze gyurdo zongwe se tewa yungo res.
So what you can see in this family pedigree, all of the black squares and circles represent people who were affected with stutter.
Ta di nanglo la rwa nakbu gi kang shagyo dwa tupshi ne da gogo ne da duzu ani changma ani khadige kange yunge res.
So when scientists took their DNA and were trying to identify genes that might be associated with the people who had stutter versus those family members who did not, they came up with a number of interesting and unusual, unpredicted genes that were associated with the stutter.
Ta khonju ga chenri ba chu khari che bare slaba ina ani kimgyu gi dongbo dila te ne ani ta nangmi di nanglo la khadigen da khamadigen gi rigze la kheba khari do ste barwa te yondu ani khonju nye de la ta chi kharsure tenga khonju da samlo ma ko wa ngba ma che gi rigze mangbo ji ke ani dewa yoba nye res.
So the idea is that hopefully they would identify some gene mutations in the people who stutter that might reveal some of the biology of the disease.
Kunzu kita samlo tanya dikhare slaba ina khadigen chogi ani rigze gi nanglo las ani rigze gi jurdo tende thebyo bache an dila tene ani kengyo la yuwa ta nganzu tende ani yongya gi ta choba che barwas.
So when the scientists go into something like this, they might have some ideas, some predictions of what they might see, but it's a very objective test, and so it's kind of open to anything. You could find genes that you might not predict to be associated with stutter.
Chidang khonju shimju chidu da o da rigze masuna duzu dan dewa yugi resna koran zo choba che ji yungurwa yimba ina ya takje ngosu chidu di ya ko objective la na phage yungobo la khari yungwa thagara tagi ores yimba yindu rigze ta ji ko deyu gi rigze khari na yong chogo orwas nye.
And you hope that identifying some genes associated with the stutter might open pathways or hypotheses or research avenues to investigate, to try to really understand the underlying biology that goes wrong in the person's in the person with stutter.
Ta khonju gi rewa che di da di ko khadiya di dan de rigze jurdo ji nye ba ina an di gi thone ani shimju saba rwa ngazu thiwa saba ta chesha saba odine yongya da ani khonju mothu ne di shimju chebala te ne rwa ani chawe rigze khari dewa chagi yeme di kyen shorwa di gi ani kekham la yuwa masuna khari khandes thepgi yoba di thebala te ne ani khadiya yungu yoba ta di khonju kharsure samlo gi rimbasura di rwas.
So this is an example where I think the scientists were quite surprised by the data that was revealed, because the genes that were associated with the people who stutter were genes that were associated with the lysosomal targeting pathway.
Kunzu ta nye hangsang goye chi ro khari nye res labaina ani khadiya dan de rigze chi ro rigze di ani tanda lysosomal targeting pathway genes di da dewa chagi yoba ro dila jesu la mi be ani gulam rigze.
Okay, so that would have been a bit of a surprise. So now you have to dig back into your biology understanding. What is the lysosome and what does it do? And how does it even make sense that genes that disrupt this process might lead to somebody who stutters?
Rwa khonzu nye di khari nye res lana dinda di ngazu jesu kharsure ani migbes jesu la mibe gulam rigzes la doa di dewa yoba nye rwa di nye wa sunza ta namba so khari na nga re la ba ina nge la jesu la di khari re 로 제수기 차와 가르치기 어래 로 디직 캔즈 공부시 로 삼로단다 갱기 디나로 로 데네 딜라 께 쇼바디기 딜라 리제딜라 아니 유르도 중화 디기 아니 카디야디 칸데스 용사레 어디 공부시고 레스
Okay, what is a lysosome and what does it do?
제가 제수 라나 가르레 아니 제수기 차와 가르치기 어레스 so you want them to discuss?
Discuss, look it up, look back in your notes from some biology class that you had 100 years ago.
저도 나네 디그레 아니 엄마기 신디가 샤바도 카체네 디그레 간제 제수 가르레샤 아니 제수기 자와 가르치기도 lysosomal targeting pathway. Lysosomal targeting. Lysosomal targeting pathway. Lysosomal targeting pathway.
Okay, who wants to tell us what a lysosome is and what the lysosome does?
The canzu chiki ni lysosome said karire di chawa karire di sunro nas.
Lysosome lam na tsoma zoni no tira, shama jani no chita. Lysosome lam na di chamong no tsoma zoni jo. Chamong no gi da nyuro do tsoma zoni no di deri to chita.
So lysosome is an organelle that cleans up the cell, that takes up the waste in the cell and then cleans it up.
Okay, all right. Did anybody find anything else associated with lysosomes? I mean, that's accurate.
Lysosome nala enzyme the hydraulic enzyme la shito. Digi yani and mogoya du mas changma suidus. Subunala go make it changma suel. Hydraulic enzyme la dig chidus.
So an enzyme associated with this, with it called hydraulic enzyme, sort of helps with the cleaning up process.
Yes, accurate, true.
Di maimbe chele khari ores.
Kono lo chado de kirti mombo chiwa chira. Ani kin taga nolo lo tagasna shimbado mombo tani choloma kin de pazo ko sida chegudwa.
Kandis.
Kono lo kirti mombo yo chira. 거기 젤리 딜 가르서는 노노노 가르서보다 모자 잡은 딱 배경에 줘도 안에 따르니 저로 마이야지 거기 제우도
장마스여야 돼. 장마스여야 돼. 젤레 찍으러와. 디마임베 젤레 심바 카리어레스 제수라 라 recycles protein.
Recycles, yes, recycles proteins. So yes, everybody has said accurate information about what the lysosome does, and yes, so go ahead.
The chick the any disease charge che the songsoa cheza kyanzo songsha chele du tagda res.
So the lysosome is an organelle in all cells, including cells of the nervous system, that is known to take in waste products or mutated proteins or proteins that need to be recycled and chops them up and recycles them and gives them back to the cytoplasm to be reused again.
tanda Jesu lai chirwa, Jesu di ngaranzu ki lu ki nanglo la tabung yodo cho ki nanglo la yores, wangza ta su duzu nanglo yores. Kunzu ki chawa khari chiki res laba ina, ani tabung ki nanglo la nigro duzu ta, ya dize gyurdo da gyurlo tep shaba, ya dize da thola do shaba duzu chu le, ani Quran di ma tumbu la ma shik ne, ani ko tabung la goya ki dize duzu, ani sö ne,
So, there are 4 different genes that are shown here that were identified in the pedigrees from these families who had people who stuttered, that when you have mutations in these genes, they are associated with people who stutter and not associated with people who do not stutter.
Da kunzu ki di rigze la tayo indus rwa ni kadigen cho nanglo la nyeba rwa kadigen madigen cho nanglo la meba rwa rigze gyurlo masuna shi nyeyo res rigze shi che rwa di rigze shi di de la koy dwa dunzo nanglo la ani kadigen cho la rigze shi nanglo la gyurlo chungyo res ka madigen cho nanglo di yungo ma res
So if you put yourselves in the shoes of the scientists who discovered this information, they now have to think about a model or some way of making sense of the idea that these types of proteins involved in lysosomal trafficking are associated with stutter. What is that connection? How does that make sense?
The chance di taxi singing ki tsenri ba di karso kangbe kangla langba inas samginal zuba inas and chance ki da di nyebarwa ra rigze du la kyen shor yondu julo thebyendu khadigi yoba di kyen shorwa jana da rigze du ki tanda jesuk ra jesuk di ani karso ra jesula mi be ani julam gi rigze re dwa di jesu da dewa yorwa da indu da ngazu gi da neju shemba di da di ani khandes jine phage khadigya gi karsore kange laur khadigya di da khandes jin degi imbes di deya gi ta ngazu samlo da sene da pesu do di khandes chike tungi imbas.
I think this is one of the exciting parts about being a scientist, is that you can get a result that you don't really understand per se, and it opens a whole bunch of other doors and questions and ways of thinking about the problem that you might not have predicted.
That's Henry Baji Imbe Chane, Tonan gets a chick did that in the Chagio rest, Susu Shimju Chene, Shimju get Tumde di, Tenga Susugi, Ngomba Cheshabata, Mitumba, Ra, and Digi, Dilatene, and Shimjugi, Gosaba, Manguji, Cheko Echida, ani dila tene ani ngazu kharsure rikwa masuna ra shimju chedangi rikwa saba mangu chego ya o di yungo yorwas chesan da shimju dida bodu zugi ani tsenri ba sola ani tsenri ba jimbe chane tonang kech chagi yores.
So this information is quite recent, and this is a review article that was published in 2020. So this is very current information. So I don't actually have a good answer for how does this make sense.
Tadi shimju di tuzela teba inas nidon nishulo tembarwa and tensa di ani karso ngazu kershi ani gi ani karso shimju sho dende tomdep dende chinal tembarwa tembache chezan shimju saba indi and dila koha khandes lengu re di gela khona thanda ke samlo ke mes.
One hypothesis that's been proposed to kind of put this information together is that in a young child's brain that is going through a huge amount of changes, growth, plasticity, that requires a high level of metabolism and growth of new proteins, etc.
따단다디 심주 녀바처럼 다디 코 제와타 타야라 아니 최샤체 찍디 카르레슬라바이나스 부구야 차게 제베 겁수 레벨 유와 망부슈지 루고르와 카르수레 레바야 아니 차론치기요레 아니 레베기다 니시기 따랑시 쟁기 레바디나로 유도 망부치 도윤두스 안딘데기 네겁수 따단다 제수디
If you have some mutations in proteins that disrupt a pathway that is known to be involved in recycling and regenerating proteins, maybe that person's system isn't able to handle that significant and rapid growth that's occurring at this age.
다 나온데기 네겁수스 코 부구디기 아니 리젤라스 리제 개발도다 단다 차봉기 나로라 아니 티젤라 소바다 니그로도 저 자주 동켄기 아니 단다 왕타지요라 디 왕타디라 다균 아니 쇼르추겐기 다 리제로 코랑기 디나르 요바이나스 라 레벨 차론 쉬우지 로데요라 아니 왕자타수 사보 망부기기요레 디 무슨자 디 규림라 아니 디제 망부지 표주 제고고요레다 딘데 디제 캬르주 제야기 아니코 가르수랑아주 체켄 딜라 아니 견 슈바이나 라 아니 딜라 테네 따딘데 네시 용야.
Okay, so that's one hypothesis among several, but the last slide that I wanted to talk about today is this idea of we've learned several things from studying humans. We were able to learn a little bit about white matter tracks and gray matter, etc., from MRI studies, and we're able to understand a little bit about genes that might be mutated from pedigree studies, but that might be the extent of what we can do when we study humans only.
제자다디 최샤 직체라 다 케사단 드링아 주기 마슈샤바 낭로라 아니 딱제기 토네 밀라 딱제 제베 토네 아니 nga주베나 레베기 달람도 주코라 카르제기 주베 달람다 야 캬제 툭르다 두주기 코네 nga주 네주직 신게라 두주 네주 신베 디시샤네 ngaranchugida pesudo bujik suetugu yorwas cheza mila takje chene ani ko ngaju nichu rabada ngajugi chusha chedo che suradi tendejigres.
And so even when you study adults with stutter, you don't know if if you do an MRI on their brain, if the changes that are different are causative or a compensation for the stutter.
저도 미 gembal라 라니 딱제도 체네 아주 MRI도 지게 par 렘바이나야스 파게 낭로 레버 낭로 유어 따지게 테비아디 민다와 지게 용기요나 딘데기 유어디 네디기 켄치네 코 유어게 바르베 야나 유어디 코 카르소레 코란 직 마창와디라 카곤치에 소라 딘데르베스디 가족이 딱달라 투마레스 MRI도 저때.
So when we come back from tea break, we are going to talk about, can we develop an animal model for stutter that allows us to understand a little bit more about the disorder and understand a little bit more about the biology of it.
제자당 아주 밀라 딱지 셴네 디게스마도 하고 두고 말와 디무즈다 디네 남샤 디 띵 사바 셴투야다 아니 코단 제여기 깽여기 다 갈소레 아니 유르도라 소바두주 십착바 하고야디 아니 하고야라다 준도샘젠라 딱제 제나다 펜도유메 디코디 아니 젤슈기인스